Well, hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are joining us from, or perhaps you're watching this on replay. It's great to be with you. And hey, we're just grateful that you would spend time to tune in today or listen to this. That tells me something about you, and that is you are the kind of leader who wants to grow. One of the coaches I work with right now says growth is a mountain with no peak. And so we're confident you're going to walk away with some great tools today, some great insight that's going to help you, whether you just lead yourself, whether you lead a team, or you work in a big organization, office environment. We're diving into anger in the workplace today. And I don't know what comes through your mind when you hear that title. For some of you, you're thinking of instances and moments right away. For others, it feels a little bit further off because maybe you work from home or you don't experience it very much. Maybe you're an individual in your journey and you don't work with a team as much right now. But it's interesting as we started diving into some of the research of how this is playing out in the workplace right now. Mastering Anger says that 45%, that is almost half, 45% of employees admit to losing their temper in the workplace. That is not just in like an isolated flare-up, but this is routine loss of control, almost half. And 65%, more than half, have been on the other side of experiencing, I love that term, office rage. And again, these are not just one-off dynamics. This is becoming the norm in so many workplaces. And right off the bat, it's interesting to me that 45% would admit they have, but 65% would admit that they would say they've experienced the other side of office rage, which says to me, some of us are giving off rage, but we don't know it yet. And so we're going to get to dive into some of that today. I know for me personally, and serving on various teams and working at a number of different organizations and now getting to work with leaders and coach leaders and teams and organizations, I'm certainly guilty of it. And I think I like to think of myself as warm and cool and calm and collected. And I like to use humor to deflect. And usually that's enough to get me by. But the second you cross the value sector in me that says too far, I know I'm guilty of it. And I've certainly been on the other side of it. And so as we start to unpack this today, I would just welcome you to get max value out of this content and to really lean into this content. Start to consider some of the areas or the arenas that you let anger sometimes get the best of you. I think for most of us, it's not a do I get angry or don't I, but perhaps a where and when do I get angry? And how do I respond? How do I interact with those around me when they're navigating the same exact thing? And so just be thinking of that. Who are the people in my world that I know have that trigger? It's easy for them to go from cool, calm, and collected to peaking at every level. And where do I have those same tendencies? And where do those things show up in my life? And so today I'm going to introduce Dr. Larry in just a moment, who's going to be presenting on our content today. We're going to unpack a couple of key things. And right at the end today, we're also going to make sure that we send a Zoom link through the Q&A, through the chat, so we can continue the conversation. If you have additional questions you want to ask, if you want to gain some insight from Dr. Larry and some of the content that he shared or further unpack it, we'd be happy to do that. And so make sure you stay right until the end. We'll send that Zoom link through. Obviously, if you're watching this on replay, that's not going to be an active link any longer. But today we're going to unpack three key things. Number one, we'll touch on the psychology of anger in the workplace and what's happening in the brain when we enter anger mode. We're going to discover how to spot some of the early warning signs. It's not impossible. There's actually things that we can look for when we're at a 4, 5, 6, or somebody else might be a 4, 5, 6 instead of an 8, 9, or 10 on that scale. And we're certainly going to make sure that we cover the practical tools to navigate anger in the workplace and some strategies to lead through it. We want to be the kind of leaders that take huge ownership and show up and bring our best selves, our ideal selves to the table. And so we'll be talking through some of the leadership strategies and how we approach it. And as mentioned, stay right to the end. We'll have that link so you can join us on a Zoom, and we hope you'll do that as well. All right, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Dr. Larry Kuhn as he comes to unpack some of the content today. And I don't know about you, Dr. Larry, I'm not angry in this very moment. I'm actually quite, I would be curious to get your anger scale.
Well, that's right now I'm feeling pretty calm, but that stands in contrast to the person that I used to be.
Sure.
You know, when I grew up on a farm, and my parents were German. My mom was half Irish. And I like to say that with kids, more is caught than taught. We learn a lot about what we see happen. And we internalize that, and it's not even often spoken. A lot of times it's just inferred, and we see it modeled, and then that's what we do. And for me, it was an interesting, juxtaposition in that my dad was German, and he expressed absolutely no emotion other than anger. My mom was the exact opposite. She's the one in the family who expressed all of the emotion, including anger, but a lot of her emotions were things around anxiety. There was some depression, low self-esteem, and she was all over the place. And so what I learned from that was that men should be in control of their emotions all the time unless they lose it. And then it's okay to lose it and be angry. And that was pretty much the only emotion that I internalized that was okay. Now you add to that, I came out of the late 70s watching Star Trek. And so I had somebody else that I watched. We were heavily influenced by our media influences. And I had Spock. And I just loved Spock. He was logical. He was rational. Emotions were, anathema. You are not to have any emotions. And even just seeing pictures on certain episodes where he would laugh, it's just like, no, wait a minute. No, you're not supposed to do that. And so I had those two things running around, that rationality and knowledge was strength, and that emotionality was weakness. And so I used to think and feel a lot of things just because of how I internalized that. And I had to learn a whole lot of things. I made some really, really stupid mistakes, but I learned that basically emotion dysregulation was weakness. People who did that, and in my mind back then, it was women. Women were weak. I mean, this is, I grew up in the Midwest, didn't have a lot of, social awareness or emotional intelligence. I just pretty much acted the way I did it. And then the other thing that I learned was, if I had a lot of emotion, which was, oh my gosh, now what do I do with that? I would stuff it and just push it down, push it down. Well, you know what happens when you push it down? It ends up just exploding after you hold it down for a while. I like the illustration. You hold a ball underwater, and if you let that ball go, it doesn't just gently float to the surface. It comes out and explodes out of the top. And that's actually then kind of the dynamic that led to me being a pretty angry person. I would, unfortunately, back then I would throw things. If I hit my hand, thumb with a hammer, I'd throw the hammer. If something didn't go my way, I'd say it was stupid. I let my anger, I kind of felt like, well, I should keep it under wraps, but if there's nobody around, as long as I'm not hurting a person, it was okay to do that. Well, there were certain events, and I'm thinking that you may also, looking at your own anger, you may also have certain pivotal moments that you have some memories where you just let the dragons fly and let it go. And then after that, I'd feel guilty. I can remember one time throwing like a pitchfork, but it wasn't a pitchfork. It was like a scraper, threw it at this stupid cow. And, I ended up putting her eye out. I felt horrible. And those types of things began to punctuate. I shared recently, I got so angry one time at a bale of hay that I just let loose on it, was stabbing it. And then I was so angry that I found when I looked down that my knife had closed on this bale of hay. I mean, it was so stupid, And here I am putting it in that framework. People who are emotional are stupid. It's just crazy how our thoughts and beliefs and feelings are so shaped by some of those early experiences that often lie outside of our awareness. So I just thought today that one of the things that would be really useful would be able to talk about a few things and begin to get a better understanding of anger. And I'm suggesting having an understanding of anger as a pattern, not pathology. And I came to myself at some point after having stuck my foot through walls and hit doors, and I broke a bed one time. I mean, I just did some pretty angry, outbursts, but I always justified it and said, well, I didn't do anything to hurt other people, but I was hurting myself. So we're talking about anger today, and I wanted to introduce this concept that was about 30 years ago. I came to this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes a lot of sense. And it goes like this, that anger is a secondary emotion. And that often before we have that emotion, there is another emotion that we actually may have experienced that was primary. I like to use the illustration of riding a motorcycle. If I'm riding a motorcycle, which I do, and somebody cuts me off, of course, I'm going to feel angry. And I'm going to maybe shake my fist at them, maybe do some other things. The urge might be there. But the reality is that before that anger was another emotion, which was actually fear. I was afraid because they cut me off in traffic. So I began to learn and look at anger a little bit differently here, that let's say that anger is neither right nor wrong. It's neither good or bad. How we use it can be problematic. And when we think about it in the workplace, we see lots of examples where ourselves or others have lost their temper. Some people use it as a well-oiled machine, that they frequently will do that pattern. But let's not move to a place of pathology and say, well, we just need to shut that down and control your anger, because that really isn't the pathway to get there. Done a lot of anger management courses with folks and men who have been, involved in domestic violence. And these are great guys. But I remember having a guy say, yeah, she made me mad and I broke her arm. I mean, to me, that was just like unfathomable. But for him, it was a normal part of the way that he grew up. That's not to justify it, but as we work through things, we began to shift and say, okay, if you weren't angry right now, what would you be feeling? So as we're thinking about anger in the workplace, I'm going to shift our focus to first being able to manage ourselves. Because the truth is, if there's an angry person around us, we cannot manage them. So I like the idea of understanding our triggers, knowing what our unmet needs are, and recognizing that sometimes there is something that is provoking us to have that anger, and we need to figure out, well, what's going on here? A number of years ago, I read about a psychological theorist named Murray Bowen, and he talked about the emotional transmission process. And he used an example of an anthill. So you have an anthill that's very stable, and he would say that it's not expressing much emotion. So it was interesting. It was a biological thing that he called emotions, rather than it just being a feeling that we had. And that was like new to me. But he said, if you kick the anthill on one side, even though these ants are not conscious, they don't really communicate, they don't have that capacity, yet there's some sort of a system that's happening that when you kick one side of an anthill, somehow the other side of the anthill begins to become what he called emotional. It would be reactive. And the reaction was really around, what are we going to do to survive? And this was kind of an interesting concept to me. And I began to put that overlay over my understanding of emotions, because I used to think and I used to feel and believe about emotions a lot of things that actually weren't really very effective to do. And so, with the story of the anthill, I began to see that emotions are transmitted through others. If you've ever been around an angry person, you know what it's like to be affected by them. We have an effect on others' emotions, and they have an effect on ours. So I'm suggesting that we shift away from anger to look at some of the things that give rise to it and begin to understand emotions in that way. One of the best things that we can do is to recognize that this is not necessarily a problem, but a pattern. Anger and explosions, particularly in the workplace, are a repeating pattern. And actually, they're pretty functional. Why? Because they worked pretty well. Often it's outside of our awareness, but we may have learned a long time ago in our families or by watching that the only way you get your needs met is if you get louder. And so we get louder and we find that my needs get met. So it's a functional type of thing that often happens outside of our awareness, yet other people are very aware. You know, when we get angry, one of the things, the functions that it serves is it intimidates others and it puts pressure on them. And it says, I'm going to control you. And even though I'm going to lose control, I'm going to use that to control you. Well, we know that several things really don't work when we're dealing with an angry person. Number one, just asking them to calm down and trying to control them, that does not work. We also know that convincing them or persuading them and trying to be logical with them or rational with them does not work, because they're in an irrational state. But truthfully, the reason that they're angry may be that they have some intense emotions. They don't know what they even are. They don't know what to do with them. Or it could be that there is something that they really care about that is threatened in some way, and that's triggering it. It could be something that was getting triggered from the past, and it has nothing to do with the current situation, but it triggers, and off we go to the races. We know that trying to control an angry person doesn't work. Trying to convince or persuade them doesn't work. Placating and appeasing doesn't really work either, because what that ends up doing is it reinforces that it's okay for them to behave that way. We also know that avoiding doesn't work. If I just close my eyes, bury my head, don't look at the problem, that doesn't work. And we know also what doesn't work is reciprocating, where we go, well, if you can't beat them, and I might as well join them. So I'll just get angry and do it more and more. So I kind of, like the idea of thinking about looking at anger as a pattern and what's actually happening there in this process. So let's take a look at that. I've shared on the screen here the anger escalation model. And this is kind of cool, because this is basically saying that if I can notice what's happening in my body and in their body, that our bodies, our physical realities, give us signs. Our biology sends us signals that we're beginning to escalate. It's called the Hans-Selye fight-flight response. That emotional reactivity that we begin to escalate. And we all have little tells, if we're aware of it, that we are beginning to escalate. So you can see here on the scale, along the left-hand side is our awareness. And this is just something that I use with couples because I found this to be true. A lot of times females are very aware of their emotions. Guys aren't necessarily aware of their emotions. A lot of times they'll say, well, I knew I was irritated, I was pissed, or I was angry, and that's about it. But women often know what they're feeling, and they are able, because of the way they were raised, how we're socialized, they communicate emotions, their brains work differently, and they have an awareness of those emotions. And often they're aware when escalation is building. And the guy often is typically, like I was for a long time, clueless, oblivious. All I knew was that something then finally set me off, and then I'd go to a huge explosion and then just repeat the cycle all over again. I don't know how many couples I've seen and how many people I've worked with who can identify this escalation cycle, and they cycle over and over and over again. And it ends up becoming, like I said, a well-oiled machine where one triggers another and it just keeps on going. Well, what do we do about that? What's actually happening when we're escalating is our body is getting ready to fight or flee or freeze and don't do anything or tend and befriend or fix. I mean, those are the mechanisms that when we are threatened, that part of our brain and the hindbrain begins to get aroused. And it's the same actual arousal place in the brain that governs sexual response as well. And you'll note that there are differences in sexual response too. So we begin to escalate. There is a point at which in that escalation that I cannot back away from it. I might as well hop on the roller coaster and ride it because I can't come back from it. So our goal when we're dealing either with our own anger or with another's anger is to increase our awareness, begin to recognize the signs that our body and their body is saying, and to take evasive action sooner, not later. Don't wait to try to deal with it when it's in that explosive mode. Try to do it prior to that. How do we do that? We interrupt the pattern. And I'm suggesting sometimes it doesn't even matter what you do different as long as you do something different. You can see on here I have a couple of interventions, and one of those is timeout. This is where, let's say it's a couple that's fighting, and one person says to the other person, why don't we just take a timeout right now because I can feel myself escalating and I don't want to say or do things that are going to be hurtful to you. And then this, when would be a good time that we can reconnect and discuss this after we've had a chance to kind of figure out what's going on from our own perspectives? By having that date or a time that you can reconnect, the other person who is loaded for bear, ready to fight, is willing to let go of that typically and say, okay, that's fine, because they know it's going to be addressed and it's not just going to be ignored. So there's one action that we can take. The second one is an I statement. And the I statement has some interesting things. And this is just a little tool that I found that works pretty well. It assumes that you have some degree of awareness of your emotions. So in this case, when you slam the door, name their behavior. Identify the emotion. I felt afraid. Sometimes we say because to connect the behavior and the emotion. But then this is an important piece, and I would like. Rather than making a demand or a command that issues to them, I need to control them, make a respectful request. I'd like for you to not slam the door. So here are just a couple of the tools. I have several other ones to share that when we connect offline and we join in a Zoom call, I'll be happy to dialogue with you and share some other things. After this as well, I'll share some of these resources. I've got a couple other real cool ones that are worthwhile to take a look at in terms of recognizing the pattern, disrupting the pattern, and having some strategies to do some things that are not just reactive, but actually very intentional. So Luke, I'll kick that back over to you and let you kind of pull things together for us.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Dr. Larry. Hope that was helpful and gave you a little insight into what's happening in the brain, what's happening in you in those moments of escalation or navigating the other side of someone who's in that same place. And so, look, our goal and our mission at AspireVue is to serve leaders and organizations well. And so we hope that, number one, this was helpful, but beyond that, we hope we can be a resource in a number of different ways. And when it comes to a topic like this, a conversation like this, like Dr. Larry mentioned, we see it all the time in leaders, and usually it's followed by a pattern of some kind of shame or almost a feeling of hopelessness. But we've also gotten to sit across from leaders and watch them walk out of those patterns and change. And that's the beautiful thing about coaching, is it creates the space to notice the behavior, notice the pattern, notice the payoffs that come from it, and also some of the costs that it brings along with it as well. And coaching creates the space to notice those things and start to disrupt them and begin to create new patterns, just as Dr. Larry mentioned. And so we're going to be reaching out, and we want to send you more resources and more things to help on this journey. So perhaps coaching is a great space to kick off some of that growth and disrupt some of those patterns in you to continue becoming the kind of leader that you have always wanted to be. And so with that, we'll conclude here today. We're going to jump over to a Zoom room. If you'd like to join us for some more dialogue on the topic, you can feel free to ask Dr. Larry questions. We'll be chatting back and forth, and we just want to add as much value as we possibly can. So you should find that now in the Q&A. The link will be there, and we'll see you there in about a minute and a half. But beyond that,
thanks everybody for joining us. And I'm going to take it off here so you can see that link, and I'll meet you on over there for a few minutes if you'd like to chat. Thanks a lot, and take care.